Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Malik. I'm from the University of Minnesota, and I'm here to talk about a project where we try to understand how user characteristics affect the use of explainable AI, which we'll refer to as XAI. So, prior work has demonstrated inappropriate reliance on XAI tools in many contexts. Even data scientists are not immune to this issue, and it's made worse by the introduction of XAI assisted decision making in critical contexts like healthcare and law. So, to understand whether this issue is universal, experimental work has tried to understand how different user characteristics affect XAI tool use in practice. So, these characteristics include demographic information, personality, and experience related factors, among others. Work in other fields like psychology have already established intuitive relationships between how characteristics like these inform decision making behaviors. Unfortunately, experimental work in XAI has found mixed results regarding these effects of user characteristics, with contradictory findings across studies. So, among this prior work, it's common to use linear models, non validated scales, and subjective metrics. So, our goal here is we want to understand, is this just a measurement problem, or is there something unique about XAI in terms of how user characteristics inform decision making? So this led us to the following research questions. First, just generally understand, how do user characteristics impact XAI decision making? And secondly, are there any measurement and modeling practices that can reconcile the contradictory findings of prior work? So in answering those two questions, we made the following contributions. We rigorously verified that prior measurement practices do not fully capture these effects. We demonstrated that more holistic approaches like nonlinear and qualitative measurements yielded those intuitive effects from other fields we anticipated. And we created some recommendations for future work to better capture these effects. So now to describe what we actually did. The big picture is that we recruited participants from Prolific, 149 of them. We gathered their user characteristics and then had them complete a binary classification task, first by themselves and then with XAI assistance. Finally, we had our participants complete post-study questionnaire. So for those user characteristics, we collected measures of demographics, self-reported, personality, where we used the full Big 5 inventory, 44 items, while prior work used a shortened version, so we're trying to be more rigorous here. And experiential factors, where we used both an objective ML literacy test in addition to subjective self-reports about AI and XAI experience. So for the unassisted classifications, participants did that first, and they did these based off of the UCI census income data set, where they were shown a table representing the values for a single data point. They had to predict whether this data point, which represents a person, made more than $50,000 annually. Participants had to provide their confidence in each classification and repeated this process for 8 different data points. For the XAI assisted classifications, instead of being provided tables, participants were provided waterfall plots, which is a type of XAI explanation demonstrating how different features factor into an AI output, theoretically. So they also had to provide confidence in their own classification in addition to the AI output, and repeated this process for the same 8 data points. So the quantitative data that we gathered from that process is the following, and we really tried to zero in on how XAI changed the decision-making behavior. So for instance, this change in trust refers to how participant scores on a trust in automated system scale changed before and after they completed the assisted classification task. So before I jump into the results, I want to remind everyone of our research questions. We want to understand how user characteristics impact XAI decision making, and see if there's new approaches that could reconcile contradictory findings of prior work. So as I mentioned previously, prior work relies on linear models when relating user characteristics to XAI tool use. So we tried to do the same with our more rigorous approach. And we also failed. So we found essentially no significant relationships between user characteristics and XAI tool use. But the presentation doesn't stop there, because this was just the beginning of our analysis. So we went beyond linear models and created nonlinear models and analyzed our qualitative data. So we hypothesized that the relationships between user characteristics and XAI tool use just might be too complicated for linear models to capture given the user characteristics we collected. Also, these relationships may not be formally established because user perceptions of AI are changing really rapidly right now. So in the interest of time, I'll just share some of our exploratory results here, but you can check out the paper for more detail. Starting with the nonlinear modeling, we created generalized additive models, which yielded several significant relationships between user characteristics and XAI tool use. For example, if we zoom in on this finding relating confidence to conscientiousness, we see an intuitive link here where conscientiousness is essentially just how careful someone is. This finding is also backed by prior work, which shows a similar rise and dip pattern as relating to these two variables. Now for our qualitative analysis, we found centrally that intuition played a key role in people's decision-making behavior, and that this intuition had many different sources. So we identified self-confidence, XAI expertise, domain knowledge, and openness to new technology as some of these sources. We also found that people rely on them in different ways, that this can differ even from decision to decision within the same person. So while linear models can play a part in capturing these relationships, they won't paint the whole picture unless we capture all of these sources. So our results indicated that a more rigorous and holistic approach can help us better understand how user characteristics impact XAI tool use. But we want to emphasize that this is just the first step toward more effective measurement. We go on to ask, how can we capture even richer insights on user characteristics in XAI? Yep. So we create a few implications. So XAI studies sometimes use arbitrary sentences to capture subjective ratings. For instance, tell us your level of XAI expertise. And this harms generalizability and contributes to the lack of consensus among prior work. As an anecdote, among all of our participants who completed the intake survey, the score on our objective ML literacy test was basically not correlated with those self-reported experience factors. Crazy, I know. So instead of using inconsistent measures, we should instead use validated scales whenever we can and complement our subjective measures with objective ones, like we did with experience. Finally, we recommend that this line of research take inspiration from recommender systems when building models of users. So we tend to just capture a handful of stable user characteristics, but there's additional context that we could log to better understand people's decision making. This includes factors like system interactions, previously viewed content, and mood. So data sets that capture these more rich contexts could lead us to discover more complex, unexpected factors behind XAI decision making. So that about wraps things up. In the interest of time, I won't reread these, but these are our contributions once again, and a link to my website. Thank you for listening.